This is lecture 7.2, Deviance and Crime. In this lecture, we'll be talking about deviance and crime, and additionally, we'll be talking about control and punishment. So let's talk about that deviance and crime thing. In the United States, serious crimes are punished by imprisonment. That's how we punish criminals in most circumstances. However, other cultures have different types of punishments. For example, some societies do shunning and banishment. This is more common in less developed countries, especially less technologically developed countries. But this did happen in American history as well. In shunning, the individual was effectively ignored by society, and there would be an edict or a statement or proclamation that we would not interact with this person. That doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but if you think about living in a situation, say Massachusetts in the 1700s, where your village agrees, we're not going to interact with you. Well, that could be deadly, right? If the doctor refuses to interact with you, if the fire department refuses to interact with you, right? That could effectively be a death sentence. Banishment works off a similar principle, except not only would we not interact with you, but you have to leave. So effectively what that could mean, if you live in a marginal society, that you would have to, you have to go off into the woods, and leave your house and everything, which again, in a pre-modern society could be a death sentence, right? Because you would have nowhere to go to. Corporal punishment is another type of punishment that is used actually still by many societies. It can include whipping or mutilation. It can include things like acid attacks. These are punishments that are doled out sometimes by the state, but sometimes they are given out by a group of angry people, which those people could hypothetically be wrong, thus taking place via informal punishment, and highly problematic. It's important to note crime and punishment change over time. These individuals on the left are federal agents during the Prohibition era. They are dumping out alcohol that during that era was illegal. However, a few years later, when alcohol became legal again, these individuals would have been guilty of the destruction of property of the person that owned it. This bottle on your right is a bottle of completely legal and prescription heroin. In the early 20th century, I believe, at the end of the 1800s, actually, the Bayer Corporation, same Bayer that makes Bayer aspirin, right, that many people take because they have potential heart issues. That same Bayer is made heroin, and they made heroin so that people could stop taking morphine. They were trying to create a less addictive morphine, which obviously they failed miserably, but they also created a very, very addictive drug. During the early 20th century, prior to the Prohibition era, it was considered part of your First Amendment rights, part of your right to free speech, to put whatever you wanted to in your body. That was the norms of that day, and obviously that has changed. Let's talk about how we control people. There are 4 types of social control. So these are reasons for prisons and other punishments. There are 2 on this slide and 2 on the following slide. The first is deterrence. The reason why we punish crimes, and the reason why we talk about punishing crimes, is to keep people from doing it in the future. Thus, if we punish people with a certain punishment, that keeps them from doing it in the future. Retribution, another rationale for crime. We want revenge for a crime that's been committed. We want, quote, justice for the families, right? We don't so openly talk about this as a reason for punishing people, but it especially comes out when we talk about things like why people believe we need the death penalty, right? Because there needs to be an element of closure or vengeance for the victims. That is a retribution rationale for social control. Incapacitation is another reason we may punish criminals, to remove criminals from society. And in our society, we do that via imprisoning. Other modes of incapacitation could be something like castrating rapists, right? That would incapacitate them so that they could not do that thing in the future. And certainly, incapacitation also is effective in terms of the death penalty. Rehabilitation is to reform criminals so that they may re-enter society and be whole and new people. Parts of our criminal justice system claim that rehabilitation is the objective of the prison system. By all accounts, that is objectively false, at least in terms of the adult criminal justice system. There are elements of the juvenile justice system that do rehabilitation relatively successfully, but in terms of adults, rehabilitation simply is not effective the way it's set up in the United States today. So here we have the prison population in terms of rates. So I'll read through this relatively briefly and just try to take in some of this information. Here we have the country and the prisoners per 10,000 residents. So in Brazil, there are 25.3 prisoners per 10,000 people that live in Brazil. 7.4% of that 25.3 is female, and there are 0% of them under 18. And we'll talk about some of the numeric anomalies in here after we read through this a little bit. In Canada, 11.7 per 10,000 people are in prison, with 4.7% of that being female and 5% of it being 18. China, we have 12.2% of the 12.2 per 10,000, with female being 5.1% and under 18 being 1.4%. In France, we have 10.2 per 10,000, with 3.4% of that 10.2 being female and 1.1% being under 18. United Kingdom, 15.2 per 10,000, 4.9% of the 15.2 being female and 1.8% under 18. India, we have 3.2 per 10,000, female being 4.1%, under 18 being 0.03%. Mexico, we have 20 per 10,000 residents, female being 4.5% and under 18 being 14%. Russia, we have 56.8 per 10,000 people being in prison, being a relatively large prison population per capita. Female being 8.2%, under 18 being 0.9%, so a little under 1%. South Africa, we have 31.6 per 10,000, female being 2.4%, under 18 being 0.5%. In the United States, we do have the largest prison population per capita, with 74.3 people per 10,000. That also could be restated as 1% of our population. 1 in 100 is in prison, female being 8.8% of that 74.3 per 10,000, and under 18 being 0.4%. Notable anomalies is the United States. We do have the largest prison population per capita, followed by Russia as the second largest prison population per capita. Other things, Brazil has 0% of its population under 18 being in prison. That is because of who can and can't be put in prison in Brazil according to their laws. What else do we have here? India, 3.2 per 10,000 people are in prison. That is because of the very large population in India, but also it has to do with the fact that there aren't enough prisons in India to hold the people who have been convicted of crimes. So that population is relatively low compared to a similarly populated country of China with 12.2%. They don't have that overpopulated prison problem, so they're able to keep more of their population in prison. Another notable thing, Mexico, 14% of its population, of its prison population is under 18. This is because Mexico does not have a separate juvenile justice system. Thus, the United States, we do have a separate juvenile justice system, so does South Africa, prison being defined as adult prison. So that accounts for that. But most notably, again, because we are in the United States, is that 74.3 per 10,000. We have the largest population per capita, and that is troubling for a number of ways, especially when we consider the next slide. Who goes to jail in the United States? Now, this top figure up here is more interesting and a better graph than this one down here. This one has kind of some problems to it. But this one right here, if you look at the total U.S. population, 64.9% of the total U.S. population, or just under 65%, is white, with 12% being black and just under 16% being Latino, 7.1% being that other population, which is problematic, especially since they made that person gray. But anyway, let's focus on the white to black population, right? In prison, we see that 38.2% of the prison population is black, while only 12.1% of that population is black. Now, yes, we do see a 20% prison population of Latino compared to 16%. That is higher, but that is within the realms of standard deviation and statistical measurement that you can say that that is roughly the same. It is far more dramatic to see the 12% versus 38% of the black population, and also the 35% white versus 64% white. These numbers most notably are talking about why are black people being put in prison. Now, you can make the racist argument that black people are inherently more likely to commit crime, but once you reject that argument, it strongly suggests that there is something inherently racist in our criminal justice system. I explore that some in the criminal justice, the sociology of criminal justice class that I also teach for this course, and our readings suggest that a little bit. But for this presentation, I just really want to point you to this very stark disparity. Now, this chart down here is okay. It's not great. Really what it illustrates is violent offenses and how many of them are violent, and that most are property offenses. Really the reason this chart stays here is to illustrate what a bad chart looks like, quite frankly, because I'm assuming most of these property offenses also probably included guns, and many of these drug offenses, many of these property offenses and violent offenses may have had drugs also involved in them. Yeah, moving on. Moral panic. This is another concept that's of interest to the sociologist of deviance. A moral panic is a phenomena in which society becomes very concerned over something that is later revealed to be an overreaction. Examples of moral panics include the moral panics regarding comic books in the 1950s. These comic books were seen as potentially leading to moral degradation of our youth and the moral degradation of society at large, and that kids that read comic books in the 50s would just become these horrible psychopaths that would be and morally depraved. Similarly, MWA, the rap group in the 1990s, was seen as being an incredibly dangerous group. People that listened to their music would go out and commit crimes and lead to the degradation, again, of America's youth. Obviously, that didn't happen. NWA was really big a little bit before my time, And I can tell you that my generation is not a bunch of depraved drug dealers who are emulating Ice Cube, who is actually a kid's movie star right now. It doesn't make sense. Similarly, a very bad moral panic occurred. It's not to say terrible things didn't happen, but the moral panic associated with 9/11, and 9/11 was an absolute tragedy, and many people, very good people, died in that event. But the panic regarding Islamic terrorism that still continues a bit to this day does have to do with moral panic. The fact of the matter is that there are more terrorists and more terrorist events in the United States who are white supremacists and who have killed more people in the United States, being white supremacists, than Islamic terrorists. The greater domestic threat is by far those type of terrorists. Now, globally, there are more Islamic fundamentalists globally than white supremacists, but they pose the greater threat to those of us living in the United States, those people. And that's the nature of moral panics too. There might actually be something to it, right? Certainly, NWA did point to a certain problems with drug problems in the inner city, but it didn't have to do with today or have to do with most of America at the time. Okay, that is today's lecture, and please let me know if you have any problems.